Heather, when she says homophones, don't make that immature laugh, okay? It's not really appropriate.
It's on the video? Good.
Got that on tape.
Sorry.
Okay. Welcome to week 5. We are doing the pre-K theme of homophones next week, so it's a little bit of a carryover into some of the study you've been doing. The pre-K themes in Melvin's system are often the lowest level sort of introducing ideas, but it seems to be right on target where we all are. So while this theme is fairly basic, I think it gives us a good starting place, and then I exploded it out a little bit for our knowledge, and you could easily do it with your kids too. So let me start there. First of all, this is a book that everybody has, every grade level has a copy of. And this is the user self-training manual that Melvin recommends you read and understand completely before you start his work. Obviously, we're doing things in tandem. Inside this book, as I come across stuff, I've been referencing back inside it. I have read it, but it didn't always mean something to me, so I'm going back in. So this week, as I was going back in to look for homophones, this caught my eye as well. And this has some important guiding principles that are just a lot of the things we've been talking about, some of the things we're going to come to, but a way to keep our heads around where we're going here. I wouldn't post this in your room necessarily, but I'm kind of using it for our work and to keep me focused on what we're doing. Okay, I'm not going to read them out to you. You can find them in the user self-training manual, or you can come in and get a copy of my chart or whatever. It's on page 22. Okay. This theme in particular talks about homophones, but he's really trying to get across some big ideas that relate right back to this. The first is that this orthographic system is to represent a language in writing to those who already speak it. And that's really important when we're talking about homophones, because, as this theme teaches, where possible, homophones that can be written differently, even though they sound the same, were done so. So imagine way back when they already had 2 words for here to mean 2 different things, but they used the same word. They had to be able to represent it in writing so people could read it and understand through meaning. The other thing is that you can't begin to write a word until you know what it means. So unless you have meaning at the core of what you're doing, and in reading it would be context, well, what would make sense here, then you'd know what homophone should be in that place. So this theme in particular teaches that words with different meanings can sound the same, that these words are called homophones, and that where possible, as I just said, homophones can be written differently even though they do sound the same. Okay? This is a fairly, like I said, fairly low-level theme, and he gets kids establishing orally the idea of homophones, that they do sound the same, but they have different meanings. He gets definitions. He uses the words here and here, which for some grades you may have already done to the point of that isn't a good example. There are others in the theme. And he goes through there, and his first bit is to tell them that you're going to tell them a word. Talk about a word that sounds like here. Say it orally in isolation several times, and ask them to tell you what it means. Well, you're going to get it sounds, and then it means a place, because you haven't given them any context or meaning around it. He helps you work through it orally several times before giving you more words to work through. Then he brings in the idea of how to write the words. Again, this is kind of low level. It would be good with kindergartners who are even just learning how to form letters. But he goes through a process of writing the 2 words together. H, they both have H, and seeing where it suddenly changes off and trying to make sense of that change. That's basically this whole theme, okay? The part that I sort of exploded out was into some deeper structural connections, and because I'm trying to get my head all around it still, I went back into his user manual, and I pulled these out as being things that I thought were very useful. And in fact, so this is kind of 2 different things along here. In fact, this first part right here was like, whoa, for me as a speller, because it just, now I've got to really, I have a strategy to use myself. So what he did in this the self-training manual under homophones was he started with 2 homophones like this, side and side. Of course, got the meaning from them. So this side means, the side of a building, and this side is something you would do. And then he asked kids, well, why isn't psi in this? Why isn't this spelling, S-I-G-H, in this one? And it's because they have nothing to to do with each other. Completely different, so they had to be represented differently. The nice thing about these homophones, and it'll explode your study, I think, is that these are only homophones because of the suffix. You take the suffix off, they are two completely different words that do not sound the same anymore. So that gives kids a way to sort of, when they're thinking about which to break it into its constituent parts, and then you can see. And as they get good, as they start to recognize prefixes and suffixes, doing that mentally is going to be easier, or in writing if they're trying to write. So he had several examples of homophones that work like this. I've typed them up. You can have them if you want them. They're on the server. And it would be a great exercise with kids to go through and say them both and get them to tell you which one's the base in and of itself and which one has a suffix that is making it a homophone. This is a fantastic exercise, I think. Of course, not all, wouldn't it be nice if all homophones had that? They don't. But this was one way to sort of get kids thinking about homophones and how you can control them. Which brings me to another thing that he said that I thought was really important. He makes a really big deal about not demonizing homophones. He says in some spelling texts, they'll call them things like double trouble. And he said, why would you start out like that, making kids think that it's something they can't get a handle on, can't understand or know, and they're just tricky for the sake of being tricky. So I like that idea, because I think I would tune out a little bit if you told me that. Well, it's not anything I can understand anyway. So this, I think, gives kids that sense of control and something they can work with. There's a more extensive list in the book. These were just some that I glommed onto. And of course, this I just was trying to, articulate the thinking. The other thing that you can do with homophones is you can find some patterns and then apply that back to a group. These may be in the smaller theme. I can't actually remember, but what these have done is looked at digraphs as being a way to remember that for some homophones, it's just going to be a digraph change. The sound of EE and EA is the same. They both say E, but visually, structurally, they're represented differently. So meet and meet as homophones, if I know this, I can automatically think, well, maybe one is EE and one is EA. What I don't have a handle on here is the meaning part. I can't figure out why these EEs from a meaning standpoint are all the same and these from an EA standpoint are all the same. And I'm not sure there is a reason, but that's on the wonder wall. So we'll be sure to ask him. The other thing is that, and this I think is a good one too, so this is the digraph WR. Just about every time that there is a word, a homophone pair that starts with the R sound, a W gets put in it to differentiate that. So right there, it's just something you know. An example of this would also be KN. The K doesn't serve a purpose except to be a placeholder, to keep it of a structural or visual placeholder, but it doesn't change the sound. So this would be fun too, to branch off with kids and think if they can think of other ways that are represented like this. In his book, he also said you can look at the trigraph IGH as well, as being something that gets tagged on for this sound, so maybe you can find that in homophones. The use of the IGH consistently to give it that difference in spelling. Okay? What I like about this one especially, is that it makes use of your base and suffix chart. And to get kids, you can also do a lot of practice with the spelling out that Pete was working with us on. So you could be spelling, not only can you tell me which one of these has the suffix on it, but spell it for me. LESS plus EN is rewritten as, check the joins, LESS, EN. You can get some of that practice going in your classrooms. Okay? I've taken pictures of these little charts I've made. I'm going to put them up, so if you want to see them. I try to keep them up here until next week. On Sunday, I usually prep this next lesson. So send your TA down if you want to, but great. Okay.